As little as 5 years ago, you'd be hard-pressed to find a successful conservative channel on YouTube. On the national stage, you'd be hard-pressed to find a politician with rhetoric similar to Trump, and you'd have to search far and wide to find any person who identified as conservative, any young person, that is. Now, things seem to have changed. Conservative channels are among the most dominant political voices on YouTube. Trump is a president with an extremely large and rabid fan base, and many of his supporters are young and exuberant. Many on the left are probably pretty perplexed by this turn of events, but explanations as to why this all happened seem to all be fairly superficial thus far. But before we get too deep into it, we need to ask if this perceived right turn is even a real thing. It is worth noting that many of the policy positions of progressives actually poll very well. 70% of Americans support Medicare for all, according to a Reuters Ipsos poll, including 52% of Republicans. The same poll showed that 60% of people support free college. According to Gallup, 61% of Americans support stricter gun laws. However, some conservative ideas also have popular support. While people generally support legal immigration and view it as a positive thing, 68% of voters think illegal immigration is a serious problem and that the government is not doing enough to curb it. And immigration was the third most important issue in the 2018 midterm elections among registered voters, with healthcare and the economy being first and second, respectively. The economy is another issue where Republicans have a bit of an advantage, at least in terms of regulation. 45% of Americans tell Gallup that they think there's too much government regulation of businesses. 29% say there's just the right amount, and only 23% says there's too little. But I tend to think that only political hacks rely on polls to tell them what motivates people to vote and to think the way they do. Whether you're looking at the left, the right, or the center, I believe humans vote as much on gut feelings and emotions as they do strictly on policy positions, maybe more so. However, I do think the polls can give us a little glimpse into the psyche of the people. But to really understand the right-wing populist movement that has swept this and other nations across the globe, we have to delve deeper than just a dry recitation of numbers. People aren't numbers. They're psychologically complex entities with profound emotional needs of both the subtle and visceral variety. So let's start back in 2008, the year Barack Obama was elected president of the United States of America. The Bush administration was massively unpopular in the wake of a botched war in Iraq that never should have happened, poor handling of the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, which I experienced myself, a giant market collapse that happened right in the middle of the presidential campaign between Obama and McCain. Bush left office with approval ratings in the 20s and 30s. He was pretty universally despised and had dragged his party down with him. McCain never really had a chance, especially against a dynamic and eloquent personality like Barack Obama, who seemed like the consummate statesman in comparison to the boorish oaf that was G.W. Bush. Obama excited voters in ways that we really have not seen since. Trump today brags about the size of his rallies. Oh, they're so big. I could find Trump rally numbers around 43,000 people, and that number was heavily disputed, with many saying it was closer to 20,000. Now, Trump himself, he's never been a credible source on Trump, has claimed attendance of at least 50,000 for one of his rallies. But even if we take him at his word, that's nothing compared to the crowd Obama polled in Denver, Colorado in September of 2008, nearly 150,000 people. And Obama routinely drew crowds of 75,000, 80,000, 100,000. He was a fucking rock star. His base was ravenous. They loved him with a burning and fiery passion that no politician since has even come close to tapping into. In contrast, Hillary Clinton's largest rally on the campaign trail was in Ohio, where she drew about 14,000, about half of the 28,000 Trump drew in Alabama in the same year. And it's no secret that many of Hillary's campaign events were sparsely attended to an embarrassing degree. Some estimates claim that Hillary's rally attendance was about 900 people on average. So while neither Hillary or Trump came close to the crowds Obama drew, there's absolutely no doubt that Trump destroyed Hillary in terms of creating excitement and enthusiasm among their respective bases. But what did Obama do with his unbelievable popularity? What did he do with his almost landslide victory? What did he do for the tidal wave of love and hope and change that put him in the Oval Office? Well, the word squander certainly comes to mind, but I think I prefer the phrase pissed it all away like a fucking moron. That's more my speed. And don't get me wrong, I think in many respects, Obama is a much more intelligent man than the Donald. But Trump fundamentally understands something that Obama failed to realize, and in my estimation, it was really Obama's Achilles heel. Trump understands that the campaign is never over. That's why Trump has never stopped doing rallies. He's never stopped going out on the road and selling his agenda directly to the American people and keeping his base invigorated. It's funny how Trump is the guy who promised to build a wall, but in reality, Obama built one in January of 2009 when he was sworn into office. Unfortunately, the wall that he built was between himself and his own base. The dynamic Obama of the campaign trail, who drew unprecedented crowds of excited voters, seemed to vanish into thin air once he entered the White House. He was quickly replaced with an aloof figure who seemed to keep people at arm's length. He was not a communicator. His Twitter was cold and impersonal. He spoke to us mostly through the filter of the media and rarely directly, and never with the sort of candor, or at least perceived candor, that we get from Donald Trump. Obama, who railed against lobbyists on the campaign trail, filled his cabinet with lobbyists. Obama, who told us he would withdraw from Iraq, never really did. Obama, who told us he was going to dismantle the government overreach of the Patriot Act, instead expanded the government's powers to spy on the citizens of this country. Obama, who promised to work towards nuclear de-escalation and closing Guantanamo Bay, never made any strides towards those promises whatsoever. Obama, who told us that his health care plan would include a public option and that it would take a major step towards bringing our medical system in line with the rest of the Western world, instead gave us a mandate to buy private insurance. Obama, the president, bore little resemblance to Obama, the candidate. It's little wonder that he received 4 million less votes in 2012 than he had in 2008. And they didn't jump over to the Republicans for the most part. I mean, Mitt Romney received the same amount of votes that John McCain did. So most of those 4 million people probably didn't switch sides. They just didn't vote. And you have to remember, there were 5.3 million more eligible voters in 2012 than there were in 2008. If you look at it in terms of voter turnout percentages, 58.2% of eligible voters voted in 2008, whereas it was down to 54.9% in 2012, and it stayed relatively stagnant at 55.5% in 2016. Obama's approval ratings when he left office were at about 47% according to Gallup. Bush's were at 34%. The lowest Obama's approval ratings ever got was 38%, whereas Bush's reached as low as 25%. Even Nixon, who resigned in disgrace, never went lower than 24%. Trump's current Gallup approval is at 40%. It has been as high as 35%. It's been as high as 45% and as low as 35%. But Trump has never done well in polls. It's one of the reasons why he's been consistently underestimated, because polls can only measure support in a binary approve, disapprove kind of way. What they can't do, at least not effectively, is show the enthusiasm of that support. Anyone can say in a phone call, yeah, I support X, but it takes a deeper level of commitment to actually go to the polls and vote for X. Trump may not have the numbers on his side, but he's certainly got a rabid fan base that's willing to go out and punch his name on the ballot. We already know that Hillary lost in 2016 because she failed to be competitive in the Rust Belt states, which had been considered Democratic strongholds and taken for granted. She won the popular vote by a considerable margin, but she didn't win where it counted. She didn't win Pennsylvania. She didn't win Michigan. She didn't win Wisconsin. She didn't win Iowa. She didn't win Florida. These are all states that Obama won twice. And if she had retained those states, she would have won the Electoral College 331 to 207. She lost by 44,000 votes in Pennsylvania, 11,000 votes in Michigan. She lost by 27,000 votes in Wisconsin. She lost by 148,000 votes in Iowa, and she lost by 112,000 votes in Florida. Now, if she just won Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, she still would have won the election 278 to 260. She lost those states by a combined total of only 82,523 votes, a drop in the bucket in terms of the 137.5 million people who voted nationally in 2016. I wonder if Hillary ever lays awake at night with the number 82,523 rattling around in her head. Of course, in the national popular vote, Hillary won by 2.86 million votes, but popular votes don't matter in this country. For some reason, who the majority of Americans want as president doesn't seem to have much bearing on who becomes president. A fact that Donald Trump once lamented on his Twitter in November of 2012 when he said that the Electoral College is a disaster for democracy, and I agree with him. I agree with 2012 Trump on that. This video, however, is not about why Hillary Clinton lost. It's about why we've seen a sharp increase in right-wing politics in America and around the globe. So I'm about to shift focus, but I'd like to say one more thing about the 2016 election, if you'll indulge me. In the last 100 days of the campaign, Trump visited Michigan 13 times, as opposed to Hillary, who visited it 6 times. Trump visited Wisconsin 6 times. Hillary never even set foot in the state. I don't have exact stats for Pennsylvania, but I'm willing to bet he out-campaigned her there too. Which is why I'm puzzled by Democrats who constantly seek to blame outside interference from Russia for the outcome of the election, or blame sexism or racism or any number of other factors. To me, the simplest explanation for Trump's victory over Clinton is that he ran a vastly superior, more dynamic, more exciting campaign. He worked harder, he had a better strategy, he knew exactly what states he needed to compete in. By the way, as a totally silly aside, if Hillary had somehow managed to win Texas, she'd have won with exactly 270 Electoral College votes. That's the amount you needed to win in 2016. I only mention it because Texas seems to get a little bit more blue with each passing election cycle. If that trend continues, there may come a day when it's very difficult indeed for a Republican to take the White House, but who knows what the future will hold. Maybe just before the Republicans lose the state, they'll make Texas one of those weird states that splits its Electoral College votes. So let's briefly recap some of what we've discussed here so far. We've been talking about how the crushing disappointment of Obama falling so far short of his promises really hurt the left in this country, and how Trump outsmarted Hillary Clinton on the campaign trail. But what we haven't gotten into yet is just how a candidate like Trump ever got as far as he did, because things Trump did and said on the campaign trail would have been death for any other politician, according to all of the conventional wisdom of the day. Trump said things that politicians never used to say, things like this.
Trump is enraging many people with his remarks about Mexican immigrants.
They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people.
How can you succeed when you say things like that?
Well, you can't, again, Gail, if the question is how can you become president, you can't by saying things like that.
And this.
He appeared to mock a reporter with a disability. Take a look.
Written by a nice reporter. Now the poor guy, you got to see this guy. Oh, I don't know what I said. I don't remember. He's going like, I don't remember. Oh, maybe that's what I said. This is 14 years ago. They didn't do a retraction.
That reporter he is talking about is Serge Kovaleski, who now works for the New York Times. As you can see right there, he suffers from a chronic condition that impairs movement of his arms.
And this.
You know, I'm automatically attracted to beautiful. I just start kissing them. It's like a magnet. You just kiss. I don't even wait. And when you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything.
Whatever you want.
Grab them by the pussy. You can do anything.
And a bunch more stuff. Yet, nothing ever sank him. He started getting called Teflon Trump because Democrats could never make anything stick. There were YouTube videos out there saying, you can't stump the Trump, even though in reality he seems stumped just trying to find his way through a fucking sentence. His political rivals on the right were perplexed as to how he was getting away with it. So were his political rivals on the left. So was the media. Once again, the conventional wisdom was, if you say things like this, you cannot be president. Any hopes you have will be dashed to pieces. You can't make fun of disabled reporters and curse and act like a petulant child, and you certainly can't talk about grabbing women by the pussy and tell your political opponents that you're going to lock them in jail. I don't know if it's true that you can't stump the Trump, but it's certainly true that Trump stumped everyone else. Well, almost everyone. He certainly didn't stump his base, and he didn't stump me either. It makes perfect sense to me, and I'll explain it. Have you ever seen the Michael Moore documentary from 2002, Bowling for Columbine? A lot of right-wingers think it's a pro-gun control documentary, and it's really not. I'm sure Michael Moore probably favors strong gun control, hell, so do I. But really, the main thrust of that documentary is that America's gun violence problem really doesn't have much to do with us having a uniquely violent history, because we don't. It doesn't have to do with our racial diversity. Lots of places have that and still don't even approach our gun homicide rates. It doesn't even have to do with the amount of guns we have. Lots of countries have armed citizens and don't come anywhere near our gun homicide rate. The documentary posits that our biggest problem is that we live in a country where the citizenry are constantly pumped full of fear by the media and by the government. Now, I don't fully agree with the conclusions of Michael Moore. In fact, I'm pretty sure I don't agree at all, but that's really not what's important here. What is important is that the documentary ends with Michael Moore sitting down with Charlton Heston, who was at the time the president and official spokesman of the NRA. The president position was a largely ceremonial gig, but the spokesman job was very much real. Heston had gravitas, powerful charisma, and one of the coolest and most authoritative voices you've ever heard.
From my cold, dead hands.
His job was basically to use these attributes to make speeches and do interviews on behalf of the NRA. Michael Moore, on the other hand, is a fat fuck who you probably wouldn't give a second glance if he weren't famous. Not much charisma, no gravitas, just a big fat white liberal, kind of like yours truly. Anyway, Michael Moore sits down with Heston and fucking obliterates him. It's embarrassing. It's one of the most savage defeats you've ever seen. Heston comes across looking like a total buffoon, even if you agree with him. I remember at the time, a lot of people were mad at Michael Moore for being too mean to Heston. Even anti-gun people were like, dude, that was just mean. You didn't have to rape him that hard. But the thing is, the guy is president and spokesman of one of the largest and most powerful lobbies in America, so fuck that shit. You're supposed to go easy on him? Blow me. But here's the thing. Charlton Heston only lost that debate, or at least only lost it as bad as he did, because he couldn't really be honest. Or he thought he couldn't. Like, watch this.
You don't have any opinion, though, as to why that is, that we are the unique country, the only country that does this, that kills each other on this level with guns?
Well, we have probably more mixed ethnicity than other countries, some other countries.
You think it's an ethnic thing?
No, I don't. I wouldn't go so far as to say that. We have enough trouble. We had enough problems with civil rights in the beginning. I have no answer.
But what do you mean?
See what I mean? We all know what Charlton Heston wanted to say there, but he couldn't say it because he thought, if I say that, I'm going to get savaged in the press, I'm going to have to step down, I'm going to be ruined, and all of that might well have happened. If Charlton Heston had said, I think we have more gun violence because other races are more violent and it's all this different the racial groups in America, it's really not the white people doing the violence, it's all these other people. He almost certainly would have been savaged in the press. The NRA might have been like, shit, too much heat, time to step down, Charlton. Because Charlton Heston and the NRA hadn't yet figured out what Trump figured out in 2016. The press is a paper tiger. The outrage mobs that want to control everything that everyone says and does, they're all paper tigers because they rely on bullying people into punishing, they rely on bullying institutions to punish people. The way it works is you say something the press doesn't like, they shit all over you, the institution or corporation or outlet that butters your bread becomes scared to associate with you, and then you vanish into obscurity. It's happened over and over again. Mel Gibson, That dude who played Kramer, I forget his name, John Rocker, Dr. Laura, Don Imus, Anthony Cumia, Paula Dean, Alex Jones, the list goes on and on. Sometimes the press drives it, sometimes an angry mob drives it, usually they both drive it together. And for a long time in this country, the left wing had a boot at the throat of the right wing using exactly that strategy. And to some extent, it's still in effect. I mean, like we just said, Alex Jones just got in trouble, all pretty much scrubbed from all of social media. Roseanne Barr, biggest hit TV show on TV, still shit canned because of a maybe racist comment, but maybe not racist comment. It was ambiguous. The message is clear. If we don't like what you've said, we'll take away the platform that you say it with. So how did Trump get around this tactic? Well, it's not a miracle. It's not a magic trick. It's just a simple application of logic. When you're running for president in the Republican Party, the liberal media can attack you, but there's no one to fire you. So when Trump says, hey, I think illegal immigrants are a bunch of violent thugs and we should build a wall to keep them out, that might offend the press. That might offend left-wing voters, but you know who it doesn't offend? Republican voters. Not only does it not offend them, it's what they think. And for years, they haven't been able to say that publicly. For years, they haven't seen anyone else say it or anything like it without that person being fired and dragged through the mud. Then they see Trump say it. They see the media condemn it. And they say, oh, here he goes. There goes Trump. They see the GOP condemn it. Oh, even his own party condemns him. But you know what? Trump still stays on that ballot. And the voters realize, wait a minute. No one can fire this guy. The only one who can punish him for this is us. And we don't want to. Why would we? We like what he's saying. Trump is certainly, in many ways, a liar. He distorts facts. He makes up facts. He says one thing one day and a totally contradictory thing the next day. Yet in one way, Trump is very honest. He's honest he's honest in the sense that he's the first Republican in a long time to present the arguments that resonate with the actual Republican voters. Whether he actually believes what he says is debatable, and it doesn't really matter. But what's not debatable to me is that what he says represents the majority of everyday conservative people that I've known throughout my life. And the polls reflect that. He's the most popular president with the Republican base ever. And I've spent the majority of my life in one of the reddest voting districts in America, so I know a lot of salt-of-the-earth, everyday conservative types. It's honestly a bit sad to watch as the liberals continue to attempt the same tactic over and over and over again against Trump, thinking that all it needs is just a little more time to work. If only they just continue to hammer home how sexist and racist and bigoted he is, then eventually someone will come along and fire the beast. But that's not going to happen. The people who agreed with him in 2016 still agree with him in 2018, and they're still going to agree with him in 2020. You're not fighting against a man who has to speak in code anymore. You're not Michael Moore confronting a neutered Charlton Heston who's afraid to truly speak his mind. You're up against the unfiltered and unrestrained reality of what conservative America actually believes. And you're not going to win by shaming it. You're not going to win by bullying it into silence. You're not going to win by trying to bring things back to the old order where the admonitions of the press and the anger of the mob was enough to shut the conversation down. The GOP has been injected with a truth serum by the name of Donald Trump. And when I say truth serum, let me be clear. It doesn't make them more factually honest, but it makes them way more aggressive and open about their actual agenda. Things are never going back the way they were. Your enemy has adapted. It's frustrating to see that 2 years later, the left has still failed to adapt as well. I have a gay uncle who is a lifelong liberal. He was married to a black man, and he lives to this day in a majority black area. And everyone he has spoken to, black or white, conservative or liberal, has told him that they feel that what happened to Roseanne Barr is wrong. And if that's too anecdotal for you, then chew on this. There's a group called More in Common. described as a new international initiative to build societies and communities that are stronger, more united, and more resilient to the increasing threats of polarization and social division. They conducted research using a nationally representative poll of 8,000 respondents, conducted 30 separate one-hour interviews, and gathered data from 6 different focus groups, and they discovered something stunning. 80% of Americans believe that political correctness is a problem in our country. The racial breakdown is thus: 79% of white people, 82% of Asians, 87% of Hispanics, 88% of American Indians, and 75% of black people. You cannot find a racial group or age group where support of political correctness is widespread. It doesn't exist. I will link the entire 160-page report in the description section of this video because its findings are interesting. Aside from looking at the question of political correctness, it also seeks to identify the hidden political tribes of America and breaks us down into 7 basic tribes. Progressive activists make up about 8% of the population. This is the only political group that widely embraces political correctness. Traditional liberals, 11%. Passive liberals, 15%. Politically disengaged, 26%. Moderates, 15%. Traditional conservatives, 19%. And devoted conservatives, 6%. The whole report is full of interesting data, and it should be read by anyone interested in understanding the modern society as it relates to politics. Ultimately, I don't think America is any more or less conservative today than it was 5 years ago. None of the data seems to support the idea that it is. The reason we have this sense of it being more conservative is because the bumbling ineptitude of Hillary Clinton and the failed promises of Barack Obama have made the left look bad. Meanwhile, Trump has allowed the GOP to come out of the ideological closet and be far more honest about their beliefs. And because they were silenced for so long, now they're speaking out with a vengeance. At the same time, the left has failed to adopt new strategies to deal with these changes in the way their opponents on the right operate. There has been no shift from the usual way of doing business on the left, no strategic adjustment of any kind. I have more to say on the topic, but perhaps that's best saved for another discussion, as this one has already grown quite long and quite unruly. But until then, I'm the Amazing Atheist. Peace the fuck out. Thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up. Please check out the Pessimist Productions Patreon, linked to in the description section down below. Please consider subscribing to this channel, subscribing to the social media, subscribing to the Deep Fat Fried podcast channel, and all kinds of other links are available in the description section down below to let you know different ways you can support this content and the content of other similar creators. So thank you very kindly.